But I keep being too caught up by all my demons, lost without the love, and I'm enslaved.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of On the Line Life Stories, where I speak to some incredible individuals who are related to Aston Villa in some manner about their life stories. And today I'm joined by a businessman, passionate Aston Villa fan, Howard Hodgson. Howard, how are you?
I'm fine, Liam. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you about our beloved Aston Villa.
Definitely. And let's talk about Villa's current form before we go into your life story. We're playing Brighton today. A tough fixture. Brighton doing really well this season. How do you think we'll do?
Yeah, I think it's a good test, actually, because I think Villa have set up very well this season to play the top teams well. You know, they look very good on the counter-attack. So when you're playing a team like Brighton that will probably sit in a bit more, you know, they're going to be a little bit more defensive minded, looking to probably get a draw based on current form. Although Brighton are a technically good side, they are sort of at the wrong end of the table. I've been a bit unlucky. I've seen some of their games. They, as you say, they are a decent side. So it'll be a good test. Different sort of test to what we've had so far. But you know, if we want to have the season that I think that we can have this year, if we avoid the injuries, because I think that's going to be key. If we avoid injuries, I think that Villa have a good shout at a decent top half finish this season.
A man who was out of favour for the majority of last season due to the fact that, understandably, the Villa faithful got angry due to losses after losses, but that was understandable, in my opinion, due to the massive overhaul of players. Loads of signings were made last season. But this season, Villa started well. They've got many wins against Liverpool's, your Arsenal's, etc. But the man at the helm, Dean Smith, what are your thoughts on him?
Well, I mean, I was absolutely over the moon when he got the job. I actually wanted him to get the job before Steve Bruce. I thought he was, well, we all know he's Villa through and through from Perry Bar, etc. But taking that aside, I think he's a very good football manager. I mean, he plays good football. Brentford played really good football, also played good football. And I was craving that for the Villa, because I'm a firm believer that, negative football can only get you so far in life. And when we've had sort of quite a number of managers in our recent dismal decade, it has to be said, the 2010 to 2020 in the main has been pretty dismal for a club of Villa stature. And I think that we just, when Paul Lambert got the job, I thought he was going to be a positive manager. Norwich played positive football. And unfortunately, he became a very negative manager at Villa, and that was his downfall. And, McLeish, we know, was negative. Sherwood was actually very positive, and so I quite liked him. But again, he lost his way. But Smith was positive, and he's always been positive. And since he came to Villa, he took us over in the mid-table of the Championship, really going nowhere. And, even up to March of that season, we were still mid-table in the Championship and struggling. And then Jack came back and we just had that incredible run. But what I like about Dean in the main is his attacking football ethos. I was a little concerned when we first came back from lockdown, but now I can put my hand on my heart and say I was wrong. I was a little bit concerned when we first came back that we looked too negative, that we were sort of reverting to a sort of a very negative style of play. I remember a game, I think, against Chelsea where we virtually created nothing in the whole game after lockdown, and the Wolves game wasn't much better. And I was worried that I totally understood what he was trying to do. He was trying to make us a lot more solid because we had become so porous and, we were letting in goals for fun pre-lockdown. But I think he'd gone too far the other way. But then away at Liverpool, when we lost the game in the end, convincingly 3-0, but I saw suddenly some really bright moments in that game where we had some really decent counter-attacks. And from there, they seem to find this counter-attacking formula that we haven't really seen at Villa since the Martin O'Neill days. So, in answer to your question, I think he's great, and I'm really pleased that he's doing so well.
I think Smith's philosophy, and you've discussed it briefly there, is the best. I think attack is the best form of defence, and you can take
Yeah.
that philosophy in any walk of life, really. People are scared to take risks. People are scared to take that leap because there's a large risk involved with that. So I imagine from your experiences in the business world, and a lots of people who watch this now take lots of risks in their life, at some points they've been scared to, but that philosophy, the best form of defence is attack. It's a great mind to have, especially within football.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. What is Del Boy saying? And he who dares wins, and only fools and horses, and that's and I agree. You know, that's always been my philosophy. I mean, in my life, I've taken some risks. You know, I had some good jobs prior to going into business. Took a risk, gave up a good career to go out on my own to a business that really I didn't have much of a background in, but it worked. You know, I always knew that ultimately, if I was going to achieve what I wanted to achieve in life, I had to really take risks and go into business and back myself. And I think, like you say, that's Dean's philosophy as well. That's the imprint he wants to put on the football club and on the team in general. And I think isn't it refreshing to see us go to the Emirates and just, you know, take on Arsenal and just batter them. You know, it wasn't like a fluky 1-0 hanging on. I mean, it could have been 5 or 6. And when could we have said that in our lifetimes? Not very often. So we are an incredibly brave team now. We don't seem to be afraid by anybody. And that always comes from the manager. So good on him.
The key to any successful output is, at first, you have to lay those foundations. And Villa had that throughout last season, bringing in new players, settling them in. And now, consequently, this season, they're pushing forward and looking to finish probably mid-table, even above that. But bear in mind that this is your life story. We're discussing your life story for yourself, your background, your family background, your friends' background. From a young age, what was your relationship like with them?
So, basically, the reason why I'm an Aston Villa fan is down to one man only. My father. I mean, my dad and his father. I think we go back at least 5 generations, pretty much to the start of the club. You know, we've always been a family that's loved this football club. And by the way, it's Aston Villa's 146th birthday today, so this is quite great that we're doing this on this day. So, and you know, it's we've got a massive affiliation. And my dad instilled into me, literally from about the time I could walk, that Aston Villa was a good place to be. And, I couldn't be more grateful for that because, it's given me so much joy and pain and tears and laughter a lot. We've been through it all, but it's always been there in my heart. And I couldn't love an institution more. I mean, I started going in the sort of mid to late 70s, and we were a really good side then. Ron Saunders was manager, and about a decade before, we'd had a similar slump to what we've just been going through. Even worse, we went down to the 3rd tier, and but this was the fantastic thing about this club. We were still getting gates of over 50,000 people in the 3rd division, old 3rd division.
Insane.
Isn't it? I mean, that just shows you the power of this club and, and what a fantastic fan base that we are. I think anybody that is lucky enough to be a Villa fan, is touched by the club, and you just love it for life. Villa till I die is accurate. So I went in the mid 70s after the slump. So the club was coming out of a slump. They won the League Cup in 75, and Saunders was building a really good side. So it had players like Brian Little and Andy Gray and John Gidman, Alex Cropley. And it was full of flair. It was a bit like the side that Smith's building now. I mean, and funnily enough, in December 76, so just coming up to 44 years ago, we beat Liverpool famously 5-1. And Liverpool were as revered then as they are now. I mean, if anything, they were more. I mean, they were they were sort of winning in Europe all the time. They had people like Kevin Keegan and John Toshak and Emlyn Hughes, and they were a very, very scary team. And for us to go and beat them 5-1 that day, and all the goals were in the first half, was my introduction really to Aston Villa. So I was thinking, wow, what a team! You know, we're always going to be up there. We're always going to be, you know, challenging, and really that's where Aston Villa, excuse me, should be. But as you know, it hasn't always been that straightforward.
It hasn't.
It's a bit of a roller coaster football club, you know.
Yeah.
So that late 70s team was fantastic and full of flair. And then Saunders fell out with a few of the players. So Andy Gray left for at the time a record transfer fee of over £1 million. And then John Gidman left as well. These were influential guys. Alex Cropley got a really bad injury at Albion, but that brought forward Gordon Cowan's introduction into the team. And then Dennis Mortimer was actually already in that team, already very important. And then he went about building his second great team. We won the League Cup again in that era in 78. Or was it 77? 77 or 78, and then beating Everton. I think over 3 cup finals. There were 2 replays, and then finally won the third one at Old Trafford. And then so as I say, the team broke up a little bit, and he went about rebuilding, and this time they went even better. I mean, so they brought in people like Peter Wiv to replace Andy Gray. Poor Brian Little got a terrible injury, which was heartbreaking. Andy and Brian were my 2 first heroes in life. You know, they were like the golden boys. And actually, Brian Little was a genius. I mean, very like Jack Grealish, fantastic dribbler, fantastic scorer, some amazing goals, great assister, and just read the game so well. I used to call him the Villa George Best, you know, because he had the long flowing hair, and he was a marvelous player. And when he got, you know, imagine now if Jack got an injury that finished his career, and that's what happened to Brian. Not much older than Jack is now. I think Brian was 26. And it was tragic. It was utterly tragic because he was a fantastic player. So he needed replacing as well. So we had this young lad that came through the reserves called Gary Shaw. And then, of course, the rest is history. I mean, we won the league in 81, incredible season, only using 14 players all season. And I think, again, parallel with this season, if we can somehow be lucky enough to avoid injuries this season and go through the season using 14, 15, 16 players, then we could have a very good season. Because I'm not sure about the depth of the squad at the moment. And to be honest, even then, if we'd got a lot of injuries that season, I don't think we would have won the league. The fact is we didn't. And there was such a fantastically well-managed unit by Saunders. You know, the balance between attack and defence was just spot on. You know, they were very, very good at the back, very disciplined, but fantastic and lightning quick going forward. Player I haven't mentioned yet, Tony Morley, fantastic player. Just he was absolutely superb winger, and he was so quick and scorer of fantastic goals. And often the counter-attacks would come through him. And Cowan's is fantastic passing. Mortimer's wonderful late runs into the box. Wiv and Shaw dynamite up front, and then a back, you know, Rimmer in goal, Evans and McNaught at the back, and Kenny Swain and Colin Gibson as fullbacks, and they were all fantastic. And Desi Bremner, I mustn't forget him. He was like the ball winner, did a lot of the ugly work. It was just a great team. It was just a fantastic team. And of course, then the next year, as you know, we went on to be one of only 5 English clubs to ever do something incredibly special. We became champions of Europe. And that, you know, you can never underestimate that achievement. You know, I know it's not with the group stages now and everything, it's a longer process, but in many ways it was harder then because you only had the champions of each country, and so you didn't have teams finishing 3rd and 4th, and you only had the champions, and you know, it was knockout from day one. And the fact that we did it and we beat Bayern Munich, who were the best team in Europe at the time, in the final. It's just something that nobody can ever take away from us, ever.
Mm.
So those are the early years of me supporting the Villa.
Yeah.
And I went to school in Birmingham. I was born and raised in Birmingham. I went to school originally to a school called West House in Edgbaston. And then I went on to Solihull School, secondary. And so I went to school with lots of friends who were Villa fans. There were a lot of Glory Hunter Liverpool fans as well, as you always get.
You get them.
Yeah. So nothing's changed there. But you know, and there was never very many Blues fans, even at Solihull, which is meant to be a Blues area.
Too scared.
Yeah. You know, so overall, you know, my life growing up, Villa was a massive part of it. My dad took me to all the home games from a very early age. We used to go to a fair few away as well, but we always had season tickets at Villa from about the age of 3 years old. So obviously the first couple of years I was sort of, you know, more interested in writing on the programme. But, you know, as I got a bit older, I really, really sucked it all in and just loved every minute of it. But yeah, so a love affair was born with the club. I was a decent footballer. I used to play sort of county level football and played for clubs and played for all my school teams and everything. And there was a hope at one point, actually, that I might make it as a pro, but unfortunately, I've had a lot of knee injuries. I've had 5 knee operations, and I did my ACL at quite a young age. And this is where people like Wesley and Heaton coming back now, it's such a nasty injury that you know, the surgery has improved a lot over the years. And then, of course, their rehab will be far more professional than mine ever was. But your leg really isn't quite the same ever again. You know, it just isn't. So I feel for those guys. I hope that they come back. And obviously, Heaton's quite near the end of his career, and it's not quite as important. But Wesley, I mean, you know, he's a young man, so fingers crossed he'll be okay. But yeah, ACLs are really nasty injuries.
Talking specifically about your parents, because you talk so passionately about football and the influence that had in your life and your school life, and how the majority of your friends are Aston Villa fans. You're talking specifically about your parents, because the way we portray ourselves now as human beings, and people at different stages in their lives, but most importantly, we inherit and we learn different values and how to present ourselves, how to live our lives via our parents, through our parents. So the element of hard working, especially when you got that ACL injury, those knee injuries that you thought, oh, this is the end of everything, those hopes and aspirations to become a potentially professional footballer, that was your main goal, and now you're looking elsewhere. So the element of hard work, the element of being tenacious, did you learn that from your parents?
Yeah, definitely. Both my parents have taught me everything that's good about me. Definitely, I would say that. Maybe a couple of things that aren't so good as well. but you know, my dad was always a hero of mine. You know, growing up, you know, he's a very powerful character, and I always looked up to him. And he's a local businessman, and you know, and he made good on a business. He started with a business that was small and local, and he turned it into a national success story. So, so from a business perspective, I learned a lot. But just purely on, and more directly on your question about your sort of your moral compass and what's inside of you, he taught me what's right and what's wrong in life. He gave me a very good moral compass, and that was really, really very valuable. It's served me very well in life, and I've always tried to stick by it. You know, honesty, hard work, positivity, energy, live for the day, don't waste days, you know, because you don't know what's happening tomorrow, etc., etc. And my mother mother's a wonderful woman. She's French, so I have a big French family, and out in the south of France, which is really privileged and lovely. And she's a very passionate woman, and she's also full of love. And she's given me so much love over the years, as she has to my brothers and sisters, and my children. You know, her grandchildren. I mean, she's an amazing lady, and also very successful in her own right. She was originally a French teacher at the school where I was at, which was a bit weird. And then she had my brother Charles, and after that she had to leave because of that, to look after him. But then she, when we were growing up, she started her own fashion business in Streatley near Sutton Coldfield, a boutique selling women's clothing, and made a huge success of that. And in fact, she had a lot of Aston Villa players' wives coming in and buying clothes, especially. So this was mostly in the 90s, and then sort of in the first sort of 10 years of this century. So she, for example, she used to have people like Alison Southgate, who's Gareth's wife, and they became like best friends. They're really good friends, and still today. And Rita Taylor, Graham Taylor's wife, the late wonderful Graham Taylor. And a host of others, Jackie Townsend, Jackie Cowans, yeah, all sorts of interesting characters. But yeah, they've both taught me the values, all the values that you'd want, and I've tried to pass that on as a parent as well to my kids. You know, always try your best. If you give your best, then what more can you ever ask of yourself? If you can leave a football pitch, leave the day at work, whatever you're setting out to do, if you can honestly put your hand on your heart and say, well, yeah, I gave it my best shot, then I don't think you can do more than that.
Yeah.
You know,
when you describe your mother there, the term versatility comes in my mind. She's been in she's undertook different pathways in her life, and most importantly, she's given it her best and made sure that you've got the best upbringing that you could have ever wished for, really. So how much because I know my mum's a great mum. She's taught me so many good values, how to live my life, and so many great lessons, which I will consequently hopefully bring on to teach to my kids and teach to everyone around me, because she's such a great role model, especially my dad as well. So for yourself, you talk about teaching your children these morals. How much do you look up to your mom specifically, and how much of a role does she play now in your life?
So I look up to her incredibly, and if there's ever something troubling me, or if I'm depressed about something or something's worrying me, she's the first person I speak to. I mean, and my wife, obviously, but my mum's still incredibly important to me, and she always will be. The problem is a bit geographic, because we live nowadays down in Poole on the south coast, and she lives still not in the West Midlands. She lives sort of on the tip of that. She lives in Oxfordshire. So she's about an hour and a half to 2 hours down the road, which isn't a million miles away. But you know what modern life is now. You never see her. I don't see her enough, and that's a real shame. It's a shame for my kids as well, because they're missing out on her. So we've actually, obviously with COVID at the moment, it's very difficult as well to move around. But we have made I think COVID has taught us that we are going to make a real effort to see each other more in the flesh, because obviously we can do these things and speak on the phone and stuff, but it's not the same. Because who could have predicted, we go back to, we don't know what's happening tomorrow. Who could have predicted this year? If we were doing this interview a year ago, Liam, we would never have in a million years have expected, the year 2020's been, and, in this wretched COVID-19 to have shown its face to the world. So we don't know what's going to happen next year. We're all hoping and praying and assuming it's going to be better next year. And, with the news of the vaccines and everything, it's looking hopeful. But you just don't know what's around the corner. Now, you can't get bogged down with that and think, oh, God, the world's always going to have problems. It is, but you've got to live your life and you've got to be positive and then concentrate on the positives. And but no, in answer to your question, she remains and always will be hugely influential and important person in my life.
How's your mental health been then in this period? Because we talked about the influence that different people have had on you. I'm sure they've gone through with your mum, your dad, your parents, your friends. They've gone through strenuous times in their lives, but especially during this period, mental health is such an important part of anyone, and it repeatedly needs checking upon, because you can't perform certain activities, you can't function, most importantly, if your mental health is not correct. So how are you during these times?
Up and down, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a model of positivity. I have my bad days. In the main, I'm very grateful for what I have, and and grateful every day, to wake up to 2 healthy kids, beautiful wife, and a good life. I'm thankful for my health. I mean, I've been through a few things myself in this year that have, we lost Lorraine's father. That's my father-in-law.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Early on. Yeah, that was in March. And it was a bit sudden, and he was 76, which today is not that great an age. I think, it hit us hard. And then I had a really bad back problem where it's got very bad sciatica, which developed, and the disc really slipped and was crushing the sciatica nerve. So I ended up having to have a back operation in July, which was scary because you have to sign all these forms saying that you may be paralyzed at the end of it, and all these sort of things. But thankfully it went well, so I've come out of that the other side. But going into hospital at this time is not nice. You can't have visitors. You can't. You feel very. What can I say? You're worried about COVID when you're in there, and all the things aren't normal. So so that was tough. And then my uncle, French uncle, who owns a restaurant in the south of France, took his own life, so it's because of COVID, because his business, years of hard work, was basically going down the tube in front of him. So that was very hard to deal with. And then to cap it all, his wife, my auntie, my mum's sister, found out that she's got stage 2 cancer, breast cancer. So that was only a few weeks ago. So we've had a bad run. But you know what? So has thousands of other people, and you just have to take it on the chin, and you have to ride it out, and you have to just focus on the positives if you can. But yeah, you're so right to highlight mental health and speak about it, because it is vital, and I think we've all had our ups and downs. I mean, how have you been, Liam?
I'm in self-isolation right now. I'm coming out the end of it, but it's been a really not a great time, because I'm stuck indoors 24/7, and I know a lot of people in the country are too, and it's a horrible, horrible feeling. You said yourself, it's been a horrible period for yourself. It's been a horrible period for me. It's been a horrible period for everyone in the world.
Yes.
So
it's
going
a big test.
Yeah. So where do we go from this? You talk about how we've learned certain things. You're going to make sure that once it's safe, once it's secure, that you'll see your grandparents, you'll see your mum, your dad, and make sure that that family connection's more secure.
Yeah.
For myself, I can, especially in times like this, I can close off, and I can not necessarily have as much contact as I used to have with my friends in normality. So I'm going to make sure that I remain sociable to make sure that my mental health's ticking over. But for you, your family, your goals, your aspirations after this time, what do you want to be? What do you want to better yourself at? You, your family, your friends, what is that?
Well, I think we need to take less for granted. I think this is a great leveler this whole year, this whole pandemic, to sort of really remind ourselves what are really important in life. And I think you just highlighted them all: family, friends, health, well-being. And I think that, you just get a bit lazy. I know I have, in terms of, seeing people. You know, I think you get into a bit of a routine, a bit of a rut, where you just keep doing the same things. And I just want a bit more, you know, to go and see my sister, for example. She lives in London, and hardly get to see her either. And I have a brother as well in London. And then I've got, I mentioned my mum.
Yeah.
My dad does live around the corner, so I tend to see him the most out of everybody. So I obviously want to continue. Losing Lorraine's father, it was a real eye-opener, you know, because I loved him. I mean, he was a wonderful man. And it's a big loss, huge loss to Lorraine, who absolutely worshipped him. And a big loss to me because he was somebody that I could always talk to, come from quite a competitive family environment, as well as a loving one, but it's always been quite competitive. And Vernon, that was his name, Vernon Roberts, he was a great guy to just go and have a calming chat with. And he was just down the road, and he's not there anymore. And I still forget now. Sometimes I think I'll just go and see Vernon and see what he thinks about this. He's not there. And that's what can happen. You know, this is, you've got to appreciate everything that you've got and take nothing for granted. And then look to progress, you know, and keep moving forward. You know, you've got to keep moving forward in life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's you know, that's my main outlook going forward. Had good news today. My daughter's just found out that she's passed the grammar school test. So we're
fantastic.
really pleased. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. So that was good news because she was very nervous about whether she had or not. So, you know, when that envelope came through and you open it up and you read the words "I'm pleased to announce," then you know you're home dry. So yeah, she was really pleased, and we were all very pleased for her. Yeah.
Yeah. For your own personal journey, we talked about the importance of health, mental health, physical health, etc. But you're a great businessman. Most importantly, you're a great businessman, and you've had links and affiliation with Aston Villa due to your knowledge and your experience within the business world. But entering that world, entering that profession, did you have jobs before that where you learned the importance of working hard, being respectful, being nice? And did the experiences that we've talked about already help you form you into the great businessman that you are today?
Yes, I mean, just briefly, I left school early, you know, not that I want my kids to do that. I think every parent says the same thing, don't they? Actually, my dad left early as well. So it was, but I did my GCSEs and did fine in those, got 9 GCSEs, you know, combination of A, Bs and Cs. They're all reasonable grades. But I did a year of A levels and I hated it. I don't know, like I literally hated it. I mean, literally, I couldn't. I chose French, history, and English from memory, and none of them were like what I wanted to do in those particular subjects, like French, for example.
It's hard.
Oh my God, it's literature. I mean, it's like doing like Shakespeare in French. You know, it's like horrible. It's like, what? I wanted to learn more about the language, not about all the old stuff. English went a bit like that. So it was all Chaucer and, you know, stuff that, again, I wasn't particularly wanting to do. And I was just had this burning energy to get out and start making money. You know, I was just a bit of a trader, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it. Not saying it's the right route for younger viewers watching this. You should at least do your A levels. And I could have fallen flat on my face. I went to work for a life insurance company, you know, like in Manchester. I had to go and live in like literally this flea pit of a place. It was a bed and breakfast. It was called the Holly House in Didsbury. I still remember it. And, you know, it was a bit of a nasty place. I mean, it was a shared bathroom on the whole floor. It was, and but it was brilliantly cheap. It was about 12 quid a night. And I went and worked for this financial services company and did all my financial services exams, etc. And I was, you know, I learned a lot about selling. That's not an easy sell, insurance, life insurance. or pensions and endowments and all those other financial services products. And but it got me up and running, and I started making a few quid. And then I moved on to I got a job selling beer for a brewery, and that was a great job. So I was basically driving all around the country selling. It was a small brewer, so it was a real ale brewer, and I was selling the beer into pubs, free houses, basically, on a sort of a guest ale basis. So they would buy, a few nines or whatever of real ale off me, and again, that was a much easier sell. That was very nice. The danger of that was they always wanted you to have at least half a pint at every stop while I'm driving. So it's like, if I'm seeing 10 pubs a day, I was going to lose my license quite quickly. So so yeah, but that was fun. I'll never forget, actually, I remember driving, doing that job on the M25, being stuck in traffic somewhere, and hearing on the radio that Ron Atkinson had been sacked as Aston Villa manager, and I was absolutely mortified. I absolutely loved Big Ron, and we were playing particularly badly at the time, and had just lost 4-3 away at Wimbledon, having been 3-1 up. But I was still really surprised that Doug had sacked Ron, but he had. So that was that. But I was soon happy to hear that Brian Little was going to come in and replace him. So, but going back to my career, so I did that, and then the brewery that was I became their best salesperson. So I had a good sales ability. They bought a company within the group called Ronson, and Ronson was like a cigarette lighter company, and made sort of pens and watches and mostly smoking accessories. And this was the early 90s, so smoking was still big. There wasn't such a taboo around smoking as there is today. So I managed to get a job with Ronson as an export manager. So basically traveling around the world, appointing distributors to sell the products into the retail and the wholesale in those different world markets, which is an amazing job for a young guy, because you were traveling, the company was paying for you, seeing all these different countries, and learning about business in all these different places. Again, it taught me a great deal. Spent some time there, moved on, and then I built a career then in the gift industry. Went on to work for another one called Calibri, and then I went into the luxury watch business, working for the Swatch Group, which owned brands like Omega and Tissot and Longines, and so I did all of that for about 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I was making good money by this point, but I wasn't making great money. And I've always had a desire, to do well in life. And yes, it's a bit capitalist and it's a bit cliche, but you do need to make money if you want to have the nice things in life, So I decided I needed to get into business for myself. So I started looking around for a small business opportunity that I could improve and take on with the skill sets that I'd learned in the last decade. And I basically found this little catering agency, employment agency, down in Poole in Dorset. This is now 2002. And it was literally one-man band. He was a chef, and he basically had started a chef agency where he was sending out chefs to work in restaurants and care homes and that sort of thing, covering permanent members of staff who were on holiday or sick or that sort of thing. So it was an employment agency, a very small one, and it was a very unexciting business, to be honest with you, but it had some potential. It was making a little bit of money. And I thought, well, it's in a nice part of the world. I'd never lived in Poole before, but I knew the area because my grandmother had always had a place down here. So we used to come down here in the summer holidays or for weekends and stuff. So I thought, well, that would be a nice place to go. So I took it on, and my dad lent me some money, very kindly lent me some money to buy the business. But it came with caveats. So he lent me the money. He wasn't going to work in the business, but he wanted 55% of the shares as sort of like, as sort of equity. And he gave me 25%. And then my stepmother, because unfortunately my parents did get divorced, she bought 20% as well. So I was a minority shareholder in this business, but it was me running it. So I knew I would have to change that down the line, but I thought, okay, well, it's got me a foothold. It's got me up and running. So anyway, the years passed, and I started to grow the business and improve it, and it was starting to go well. And I was thinking, Christ, I only own 25% of this, and I'm doing all the work. So I said to my dad, well, can I pay you back and have the shares? And saying to Christine, they went, well, no. In the end, I had to pay them over double what they invested to get them out of the business. Yeah. I had to take a second mortgage on my house to do it. But I knew it'd be worth it.
Yeah.
Because equity is king. You've got to own your business, And so, so they came. And it was around that point where I was getting married. I met my wife, Lorraine. We got married, and then she became involved. I got her involved in the business. We bought another agency called Best Recruitment, which was a sort of our agencies basically. So we've got the chef and catering agency that supply care homes, and we have another agency called Best Recruitment that supplies all sports stadia. I mean, we've grown it a lot now, but as you can imagine, at the moment, it's not doing anything because all the sports stadia are empty. Because we mostly supply hospitality staff to the sports stadia, so on match days. So that one's a bit struggling at the moment, but it will come back. But the one that with the chefs, I've grown into healthcare. So we supply a lot of healthcare staff to hospitals and nursing homes and that sort of thing as well. And it's just grown, Liam. It's just grown over nearly 18 years now. It's a successful, strong business that is built on bricks. We've built it well. We've got a very good client base. We've got an excellent team of staff that work for us now. I'm still hands-on. They still get reports from everybody every day. But I've got a very good team of staff that help me. The jobs that I had in those early years, rather than going to university or finishing my A-levels, they were the grounding that I needed. But that was just me. It's not the same for everyone. Somebody that wants to be an accountant or wants to be a lawyer or wants to be a journalist, they should do their A-levels and do a relevant course or a degree, etc. But for me, I knew that further education wasn't going to really serve me any purpose. I had to go and get real life experience as soon as possible.
So was there any point where you wanted to give up then? Or was it that you had no other option and you were really invested in this already? You wanted to continue on this path?
Before I met Lorraine, there was another girl that I was engaged to, and her father was hard work. He didn't think I was good enough for his daughter, and that was the main problem.
Wow.
But I honestly think if she brought Prince William home, he wouldn't have thought she was good enough either. He was one of those sort of dads, God rest his soul, John Jacobs, his name was. He's no longer with us. And actually, I was really good friends with her brothers before I got together with her. Maybe that was an issue. And because I used to get on really well with the dad until then. The reason why I mention them is because when I was on that career path in the luxury gift world, if you like, that was around the time when I made the decision to try and go out on my own. And he was like just adamant that I was making a huge mistake, and it was a waste of all the work that I had done to sort of get to where I'd got to in that particular industry. And a lot of his arguments made sense, but he really battered me mentally about, he said, well, why do you want to buy that tin pot outfit, down there, and all that sort of thing. And so I could have easily given in and said, no, okay, you're right, I'll stay on the career path. But I knew that had a ceiling. You can only get so far doing what I was doing. And my ambition was to go beyond that. It brings me on nicely to a guy that I got to know very well to do with Villa, Doug Ellis.
Oh, wow.
And I always like Doug. Doug has a real mixed press from the fans, especially the older ones. A lot of them think he's a big ego and selfish, and it was all about him. And to a point, that's true. I mean, he did have a big ego. I don't think he would deny that. But you know what? He also absolutely was a great guy. And he was the sort of businessman that I wanted to emulate. Him, my dad as well, I'd mentioned. They were the sort of role models that I looked at when I was growing up and going from a sort of boy to man, young man to man, that I wanted to emulate. And Doug had a number of sort of local businesses in the West Midlands prior to becoming, the Aston Villa owner. And so yes, he was always somebody that always encouraged entrepreneurship and encouraged sort of people that wanted to have a go at it. And so yeah, he was always really good to me. And I thought overall he was actually a pretty good owner of Aston Villa, a pretty good custodian. If you look, yes, things went badly wrong when he first took over after the European Cup, and within a few years we'd been relegated, which was quite a fall from grace. But then he got Graham Taylor, and within a couple of years we were nearly league champions again. We went from being relegated in 86, 87 to going up first year, nearly going straight back down, but just survived. And in 89, 90, we nearly won the league again. We came second. There is parallels with what's going on at the moment.
Yes.
There is, honestly. 88, 89, we only just stayed up when we got promoted the first season back. We just stayed up. And then 89, 90, we shocked everybody. We're very similar to what Leicester did a few years ago. We just came out of nowhere. And frankly, we should have won the league that year. It was only in the last few games that we started to stutter. And it was the same, actually, in the very first Premier League season under Ron Atkinson. Could have easily won the league that year as well. But yeah, Doug, great guy. Yeah, and I went to his funeral. Yeah. I went to Graham Taylor's funeral as well. And both great guys, great big Villa men, big and you look back in the recent history of Aston Villa, they're both big men for Aston Villa, definitely.
So you're knowledgeable, you're a great businessman. You established already that you're a passionate Aston Villa fan as well. So I believe the year was 2015 when you decided to create this consortium to take over Aston Villa. What was your thoughts around that?
So basically, Villa, as you know, if we just go back a little bit for the Randy Lerner era. So Doug sold in 2006, and we were all so excited when Randy took over because, it was that sort of Abramovich type billionaire owner that we'd all been craving. And in fairness to Randy, you know what? He had good intentions. Randy Lerner, for the main, had very good intentions with Aston Villa, certainly in the first few years. And he lost a fortune. When you compare, Doug made money out of Aston Villa. He ended up, walking away with 20 million quid and put in very little in the sort of 24 years that he was owner. Whereas Randy, in the sort of 10 years that he owned it, I mean, I dread to think the money he lost. I mean, I think it's 200 to 300 million pounds that he burnt
Wow.
Aston Villa. Yeah, um, and um, and so the reason why I sort of thought enough's enough, I've got to do something here, was that the club was just going, like that. It had been coming from the day O'Neill left, really, in 2010. We'd had all those good seasons with Randy, where we finished 6 3 years in a row. Should have won the League Cup in 2010. Vidic had been sent off, etc. And I think the moment O'Neill walked out the door, things started to go wrong. Lerner basically said, rightly, because he'd been spending, and half the squad that O'Neill had made him buy, he was ignoring. There were loads of players like Steve Sidwell and Nigel Reo-Coker and Marlon Harewood and all the, Carlos Quella, players, that just as cost combined a lot of money that we just, that most of the time we're sitting on the sidelines. He didn't really want to rotate the squad much, and yet he wanted to buy more players in that summer. I think he wanted to buy Aidan McGeady, and Lerner said, no, you can't have him. We've got enough wingers. You've got to sell before you buy from now on. The squad's bloated. The wage bill is huge, and I'm losing a fortune every year because even though the TV money wasn't as strong yet at that point, but it was still relatively big. But we were posting huge financial losses, and it was only Randy Lerner's checkbook that was keeping the club afloat. Every year he was having to pump in a load of money just to keep the club solvent, and he got fed up with it. And you can understand why. His personal wealth was going down with the club. So, O'Neill, as we all know, threw his toys out the pram 3 or 4 days before the start of the season and quit. And that, put everybody in a difficult situation. And obviously, Houllier came in a few games into the season, and it never really worked. I think it could have done, given a bit more time. I mean, he was quite, he had some good intentions and probably some good ideas if he'd been left there a bit longer. But again, he got ill. So it was a little bit taken out their hands. And then, they had the mad moment of appointing McLeish, which was just a bizarre appointment on so many levels. I just forget the Blues thing. I mean, that's a red herring. Yeah, it's not great. He came from Blues. But I mean, the fact is he was not a good manager. He just relegated Birmingham, and then football was very negative, and it's just not what, it was a really, really backward step. And by this point, Lerner wanted to sell the club. He'd had enough. And I think, Lambert and McLeish, they didn't really get, for all that I don't think they're very good managers, they didn't really get a fair deal from Lerner. His interest totally waned. And it was quite common knowledge that from about 2013-14 onwards, he wanted out. And when you have an owner that feels like that, it rubs off. If your owner is not committed to any business, it rubs off. And you could just see the place was going stale, and it was going to get relegated. It was. And so tried in 2014 with a group, and that never came to anything. But then in 2015, there was 3 of us. There was myself, Tony Dunn, and Neil Mahapatra. And Tony Dunn's a big Villa fan as well, and Neil's a London corporate financier. And he'd been in touch with a company called China Equity in China, which was a big sort of private equity fund. And they were very keen to buy a Premier League football club. And they liked the history of Aston Villa. We did a big presentation to them about, the history of the club and the fact it was a European Cup winner, and and all its infrastructure, etc. And they bought into it. They wanted to buy Aston Villa, so we went. So we got the funds in place, and they knew that it wasn't just going to be a purchase, that there was going to have to be investment on top, because the squad needed investment, etc., etc. And that was all in place. We then went to see Bank of America, Merrill Lynch in London, and we had a meeting with Peter Bell there. And he told us the asking price, which was 150 million at the time, because we just got to the FA Cup final. Obviously, we got trounced by Arsenal in the final, but we'd had that great semi-final against Liverpool where Jack first came to the party, if you like, the first time people really noticed Jack Grealish. And so we were still a Premier League club. So, yeah, and Tim Sherwood, looked like he was going to be a successful appointment at that point. And Tom Fox was relatively new CEO appointment from Arsenal. And things were, in place, hopefully, with some rejuvenation in the ownership to take it forward again. We were certainly very hopeful. We had a good plan, and we had a really good plan around recruitment specifically. And yeah, we agreed the price with Randy, 150 million. And we then we went about doing our due diligence. They entered us into the data room, which gave us access to all the information on everything you could ever imagine to do with the football club. Every transfer, how each transfer had been structured payment-wise, every piece of land it owned, every loan it had, which it hardly had any borrowing. Again, credit to Lerner, there was very little debt in the business. There was an overdraft facility, and that was about it. So the finances are all in good shape. We're very excited. The due diligence was going well. It looked like it could happen, and I was going to be on the board, and I was, it was really exciting times. And then, literally, it was just before, trying to think. Yeah, it was in sort of mid-July. He basically said, "I've changed my mind. I'm not going to sell this year." And it's like, "Oh, you're joking. Why?" And he said, "I'm going to sell Benteke. I'm going to sell Delph. And, I've got a raft of signings that we've lined up that we think, can take the club on. And I think I can, maybe get more for it next year." Because he originally wanted over 200 million for it to try and recoup most of his losses, And of course, we know what happened. He kept it. We got 17 points and got relegated. And he sold a year later for half of that. He got 70 million in the end. Unfortunately, when it came to him selling the following year to Tony, it was something that my fund weren't interested in because they weren't a Premier League club anymore. So that was that. Sad.
Getting a good insight then when you were approaching the club in terms of buying it with that consortium, you said the finances were okay. Randy took good care of that. But who do you think really was at fault for the decline of Aston Villa that season, that season in which we got 17 points and consequently went down to the Championship?
If you look at that season, I mean, there's that massive game, wasn't there, at Leicester? Do you remember that game away at Leicester?
3-2 win.
So we were 2-0 up, weren't we? And absolutely cruising. Yeah, Grealish scored, and Carlos Gil scored that great goal as well. And, we were looking really good side. And it was about 65, 70 minutes on the clock. It was still 2-0. And he made those really weird substitutions. I don't know if you remember. I think he may have taken Grealish and Hill off. And as we know, we ended up losing 3-2. And what a sliding doors moment for that season for both clubs. Because that was the season Leicester went on to win the league, and we barely got another point, And I do think, I think that there was massive issues in the internal politics with Sherwood and Riley. Sherwood wanted to buy more sort of Premier League proven players like Aaron Lennon and Adebayor and players like that. and Riley wanted to go, and Almstead and Fox wanted to go down the route of Amavi, Villiers, and AU, and Traore, etc., and Vertu. And look, they all look like they're good players now, don't they? They've all gone on to be great players, but it was too many at once. I think you had too many rookies at the same time, and it was just too much, especially when you'd taken out those key players, Benteke, Delph, and Vla, you know, and to a lesser, cleverly, you know, they were, you know, at the spine of the team. That I know that a team that hadn't done particularly well the previous year, but was certainly a lot more competitive than what we ended up with. So I think Lerner's head was still all over the place. As I said to you, very nearly sold the club. Only, you know, quite late in that summer decided not to. So it wasn't getting proper leadership. Fox, I got to know quite well. Very nice guy, very capable businessman, not particularly football orientated man. I mean, brilliant commercially, like, you know, great success before at Nike and at Gatorade and at Arsenal in the commercial role. But I think as CEO, he was a little bit not out of his depth. That's disrespectful, but yeah, he needed more help on the football side of things. And I think Sherwood was very selfish, and he would use the press a lot to cause trouble. And by the way, the players that Sherwood ended up getting were very disruptive. So Micah Richards, Lescott, Gested, you know, it didn't work. You know, it wasn't something that the whole mix was just all wrong. And as you know, and as we saw, it was a disaster. Should they have kept Sherwood? Possibly. Because I saw the logic in the Remy Gard appointment because of the French players, etc. But, you know, as it turns out, the likes of Gabby and Micah and Lescott run that dressing room, and they just never gave Remy Gard a chance. So it was doomed to fail.
Richards and Lescott,
Yeah.
that's an interesting pair, because both Lescott was a self-proclaimed Villa fan. Not sure how that came about, but because he came from the area, etc. But Richards is a funny one because he stayed with the club during those championship years, didn't play a single game. Did you ever get to meet the players? Did you ever get to did you ever sense a certain feel from them? Because you talk about the fact that Richards, Lescott, Gabby, they ran that dressing room. So did you then see certain players who were disrupting the place? And if you were owner, how would you have gone about changing that atmosphere?
Yeah, so yes, in terms of to get to know quite a few of them, both at that time and latterly, and I can tell you about the dressing room that went into the championship, because I became very good friends with Tommy Elphick, and he's given me fantastic insight into which I know he shared on with the Villa View guys as well in the past, but you know, but yeah, Richards and Lescott and Gabby, you know, they just didn't buy into Gard at all. I think they liked Sherwood. They would have been. I think the club misjudged. They should have stuck with Sherwood. I think they'd had a better chance of turning it around with Sherwood than Gard. And the club was just so horribly split, Liam. I mean, you know, you've got to pull in the same direction when you're in such a competitive environment like the Premier League. You've got to be all at one, and when you go on that pitch, you've got to be as one. And they so weren't. You know, you could have little cliques in the dressing rooms of a few of the French lads, you know, and then the English boys, and you know, they just couldn't care less. That's the upshot of it. They couldn't care less if they won or lost, you know, and never more epitomised by that you know, that awful drubbing that we took from Liverpool, and then the famous tweet from Lescott afterwards. You know, it was just, God, it's, you know, it makes me feel sick even thinking about that season. It was so bad. And of course, you know, I literally almost got my hands on the club that summer, and the people that were going to invest obviously were saying, well, did we dodge a bullet, you know, when they saw what happened that season? I said no, because actually I don't think it would have gone like that. You know, I think you have to be, I agree, I can totally understand the football director and manager scenario that you're seeing more and more at football clubs now. But they've got to be on the same page. And, you know, Sherwood and Riley clearly never were. And and then Fox was much more on Riley's side. And if the football manager is the one, I think Sherwood was contributing, you know, to a disruptive dressing room, because he was acting like a spoiled brat, if you like. You know, he hadn't got what he wanted in the summer, and he almost thought that he was untouchable, and that he wouldn't get fired. And it backfired on him, because he did, and he's never had a job in football since.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, except for, you know, a little spell at Swindon, which didn't go very well.
He was one of the directors there. So going from being, like you said, a sport brat in the changing room, how does that work?
Yeah. Oh, I know, because his mate owned Swindon, basically. That's how. Yeah. But yeah. So, but yeah. In terms of if I'd been, you know, involved at the club at board level at that time, I would have hoped it would have been much. You know, we recognised that recruitment and putting a dressing room together is absolutely critical to the success or failure of your football club. Not buying a bunch of talented individuals. You've got to get that, you know, like it's like baking a cake. You've got to get the ingredients right. You know, the character, the age. You can't just have all young players as well. You've got to have a mix. You know, you know, of experience and potential. And, you know, we would have been very, very careful on that. And I don't think they showed anywhere near enough care or did their due diligence when they made their signings that summer. It was all rushed. And why was it rushed? Because he was selling it until quite near the end. You know, it was that, you know, it all comes back to that. You know, it was poorly planned. And, you know, you look at Man United now, you know, they've got such amazingly talented players, but you see that there's something missing there. You know, they should be doing better than they are. Some days they look great, other days they look awful. And it's because there's definitely some splits in their dressing room, in my opinion, as well. You know, and I think at the moment Villa have got a very, very positive dressing room and a very, very positive sort of outlook, a big togetherness. And that's what you need. You need togetherness in your club. You need to all be pulling in the same direction, and you need to be all very committed to winning football matches ultimately. Yeah.
There's a famous video on the Villa View where there's a guy called Luke, Ginger Luke, who goes by on Twitter, on social media, and it's a famous video where Matt Lynch interviews him outside Villa Park, and he screams, well, not necessarily screams, but he says to the camera something like, Fox, Lerner, hand your resignations in. So you could see that the fans were starting to blame certain individuals. And do you think it was fair that Lerner and Fox and these certain individuals were getting the blame? And who do you think that, if anyone was going to, we talked about the fact that the players were split in the dressing room. Do you believe that they were majority to blame at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it comes with the territory, you know. I mean, that is, you know, people have said to me, you know, when they've heard about, you know, my near miss of buying Aston Villa, well, you know, maybe you would have ended up hating it because, you know, things have gone wrong. You know, you may have started getting that sort of abuse, and it's perfectly reasonable to have expected that, because, you know, as I say, I've watched Doug Ellis get handed out of the director's car park at Villa Park on numerous occasions, you know, when things weren't going so well. And is it fair? Probably not. because at the end of the day, you know, as I said to you, Randy put £200-300 million of his family's money into Aston Villa, you know, and there isn't a lot of people that really remember that now or that grateful for it. The players are ultimately the ones that should be blamed because they're taking money out of the club every week, huge amounts of money, and they clearly weren't trying very hard. But Fox was paid a lot of money to run the business, and running the business meant that you had to recruit well, and you have to get results. It's just that's the nature of the beast. It's you know, you've got to. Is it fair? Probably not. Is it expected? Absolutely.
Before we
It's just
go,
the way it is.
the man who inherited Aston Villa after that poor end to his run as owner, Randy Lerner, the man who took over was Dr. Tony Shear. Now, we know he's, due to the end of his run, being that he gambled it all on that playoff final against Fulham, and consequently that saw the club nearly going to expulsion, and life as we see now as Aston Villa may not have been like this if we didn't get Nasser and Wes in. So I know that you said that you had a quite important part to play in the Shia ownership. What was your affiliation with Aston Villa like at that time, being that you had just a few years ago unsuccessfully tried to bought the club from Lerner?
Yeah. So one thing Greg Evans, who I watched your interview with him, by the way, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Nice guy, Greg, isn't he? Really nice guy. One of the things Greg asked me when he did a piece on this recently was, did you feel envy when Shear bought the club, you know, a year after you nearly did? And of course I did. You know, I was green with envy to a point. But what I was much more concerned about was the fact that we were in such a mess. You know, a year had passed and we just got 17 points, one of the lowest ever totals from a Premier League club, and we were clearly a club in utter disarray. So I wrote to Tony Shear straight away and said, listen, I would be willing to come and work at the club for free to help you put this club back together, because, you know, I've got a plan and I think I know how to, you know, I think it would work. You know, it's based a lot on some of the stuff that we'd done a year ago, where obviously financial parameters had changed. We're no longer a Premier League club, but a lot of the principles could have been still made to work. I never got a reply anyway. But he went on to appoint Keith Wyness, who I knew wouldn't be a good appointment. You know, I remembered him at Everton and spoken to a lot of people at Everton, didn't like him, and I didn't like him either. It was a bad appointment. I think Tony, a lot of the reasons why Tony didn't succeed was he was let down by his executive. You know, I think his executive just weren't up to it. And I include Round in that. And certainly Wyness, and they invariably didn't appoint the right managers and who didn't sign the right players. But just so to go back to the start of that, so I got to know Tony Shear because I used to go to the directors. I used to watch the games in the directors club, where you basically, there was a dining room at the end of the Trinity Road, sort of hospitality, and all the directors would sit there and you could have lunch with them, and then you'd go and watch the game in the director's box. It's quite a nice thing to do. And I got to know him, and we became quite friendly. And he knew nothing about football when he first came in. Hence some of his silly comments, like, you know, we'll win the Champions League in 5 years and all these. I was like head in hands when he was doing that. I was thinking, what's he doing? You know, he's putting so much unnecessary pressure on himself here. But he wanted everything yesterday. It's classic, you know, Oriental for that. You know, he really wanted everything yesterday. He expected Villa to get promoted in the first season. And when things started so badly, after he'd spent a lot of money that first summer with Di Matteo, on players like Ross McCormack and Kodja, etc. He was. I think he was very impulsive. I don't think he should have sacked Di Matteo so quickly. I think Di Matteo deserved more time than he got. I don't know if Di Matteo would have been a success or not. I really don't, because his managerial record is checkered, to say the least. You talk to people at Chelsea, they say he's quite lazy, doesn't attend training every day, and I don't know. But I don't think 11 games was fair. I think he deserved longer than that. Because if you remember, a lot of those games we could have won. We kept letting in goals in the last minute, didn't we? To turn wins into draws. Anyway, Weiner persuaded him. I mean, by this point I was talking to Tony a lot, and I really wanted him to get Wagner from Huddersfield.
Yes.
And we interviewed him. Basically, the shortlist was Wagner, Dyche, even though Burnley were in the Premier League, or Bruce. And I said, don't go for Bruce. I said, Bruce is like, he's another one of these negative football merchants. And I know he has a good championship record, but he won't build you anything long-lasting. It would all be very short-termism with him, and that's if he's a success or not. But in the end, and at one point it looked very likely that we might get Wagner, but Tony wanted guarantees that in the managing contract to say that I have the right to fire you and no compensation if you don't get us promoted by the end of next season. So not that first season, but by the end of the second season. And none of them would accept it, but apparently Bruce would. So Bruce got the gig, and I'm not a fan of Steve Bruce. I just never been a big fan of his managerial style or the football that his teams play. But he is. Some people like him, and he keeps getting jobs in football, so he must do something right. But anyway, as we know, the rest of that season was a bit of a non-event. We ended up in mid-table. He did, to a point, turn us around, but I thought he had a particularly poor January window when he signed likes of Bjarnason and Hogan, Bree. He did sign Huran, who's been a good signing. But in the main, that January window was a bit of a disaster. And then, of course, the following season, John Terry came in. Massive moment for the club, because he's been a very positive influence, I think, on Villa in general. First as a player, secondly as a coach. And then, Snodgrass obviously was very influential that season. And we should have got promoted, Liam, automatically. With that squad and that payroll, the payroll was up to about 70 million again, for the Championship. That's mad. You just can't survive on payroll, like that, annual payrolls like that in the Championship. And unfortunately for Tony, the money started drying up from China. Now, this isn't because he's some crook or some con man, like a lot of people have accused him of. It's because the rules in getting money out of China into foreign countries changed. And he wasn't allowed from about December, what would that be, 17? Yeah, December 17, to get money into the UK, because the business model was way out of sync. X was going out, Y was coming in, and there was a big disparity, as there had been, by the way, throughout the Lerner years as well. But Lerner had always, as I mentioned earlier, had topped it up, and Shearer was having to do the same thing. But then the money started to dry up, and the bills started to mount, and the debt started to mount. And when we lost that game against Fulham in that day at Wembley, which was a nightmare, wasn't it? Such a painful day. The next day, I got a call from his assistant, Ho, saying, "Can you lend us £2 million?" I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, and he said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "As God's honest truth on my kids' lives, I got this phone call on my mobile quite early on the Monday morning." I said, "What do you need that for? Is it things that desperate? 2 million in the grand scheme of things, in football clubs, it's not a lot of money. It's a lot of money to you and me, but it's not a lot of money to the football club." He said, "Well, if we don't pay that to the HMRC by the Friday, then we're being wound up." I said,
Oh my God.
"What?" I said, "How bad is this?" I said, "Well, surely you can raise a loan. You've got another another year's parachute payments to come. We've already spent that. It's gone. Parachute money's gone. We've borrowed against future transfer payments from Macquarie Bank on players. So future income on players that we'd sold, they'd already borrowed it and spent it." Honestly, the club was up to its neck in debt. From that very stable financial position I described to you when I looked at it when Lerner, it was now in a horrible mess in 2 years. It had just, because as you said, it had been a casino operation. They had literally put their house on promotion. And with the money drying up from China and him not being able to get the money into the club, it was going to go bankrupt, and very quickly. So they were desperately trying to sell Jack. And if Daniel Levy had coughed up the 20 million, he would have taken 20 million. And Levy, thought, "Oh no, I can get him for less than that," because the word was getting around that the club was in a financial turmoil. And so he played silly buggers and didn't come up with it. And what a mistake that's proved to be from a Tottenham perspective. And I said to Tony, "Listen, I by the way, I didn't lend them the 2 million, but I did help them get a short-term loan. But they had to mortgage a car park, I think, to get it." Honestly, it was this desperate by this point. Bodymore Heath had already been borrowed against. Also, it was.
God.
So, but that literally bought them another couple of weeks. They owed the Inland Revenue a lot more than that. They hadn't been making their HMRC PAYE payments for months. And if you don't pay the HMRC, they will wound you up. That's one organisation you don't mess about with. So it was desperate. I said, "Look, you've got to either sell a stake of the club, you've got to get an investor in, or you've got to sell the whole shooting match, and you've got to do it soon." So I started looking again, and I actually got some bites. I got some people that were interested in it. But then when Nassif and Wes came around, which was, they were like these knights in shining armor.
Yeah.
Because they literally saved us, literally, because the people that I had we would have turned it around, but it would have taken years because of the debt, whereas these guys, they wiped it all out. These guys already must have spent 300 million at least on our club. They have been incredible. And one thing I would give credit to Tony was he did a particularly bad deal for himself in that deal. He knew he had to. And Wes and Nassif, they're very, very strong, but they haven't got to where they have in life without being exceptional negotiators. And they knew he was, on his backside. He was, and so they screwed him for a pretty awful deal from his perspective. But he bit the bullet. He knew he had to do it, and he knew that they had the clout and the financial muscle to get Villa out of this horrible hole that they were in. And they've been good to their word, haven't they? I mean, they've been absolutely faultless to this point.
Yeah. Before we go, then, Howard, I just want to ask you, where do you see Aston Villa then going now as a football club? Because we started this season so well, and we've had players like Ross Barkley come in who have were vastly experienced within the international scene and were in and out of the England squad.
Yeah.
And the squad's improving. Dean's getting more experience within the Premier League. And we've brought in Craig Shakespeare, who's part of that title-winning Leicester City squad. So where do you see Nassif and Wes taking Aston Villa as a football club?
I think that Nassif and Wes want to take Villa right back to the summit. I really do. And unlike Tony, I think they could do it. You know, I mean, massive moment this summer. I mean, if we got relegated, and let's be honest, it wasn't looking good, was it? You know, going into that Crystal Palace game when we were like 7 points adrift with 4 games to go, it was looking pretty dodgy. And then Palace scored that goal, and it was ruled out, thankfully, by VAR. You know, and I think that was a huge turning point in this club's history. Because if we got relegated again, I can't guarantee you how they would have reacted. I think they are ultimately, they're businessmen. They saw Aston Villa as a massive opportunity. And it's been all money out all the time so far. They haven't bought this for romance. They're not massive Villa fans like you or me. They're growing to love the club, of course, because, you know, it's becoming part of them now. But their main aim is that they saw it as a main. They were never in the picture when Randy was trying to sell it. They never wanted it then. They didn't think it was good enough value for money then. But when they saw the deal, they got it for virtually nothing, because it was worthless virtually. You know, it was bankrupt. So they got a great deal, but no, they want to make us. They want to put us in the top 4, and they want to keep us in the top 4. They want us to be challenging on the European stage. They want to see us win another European Cup. I mean, that's what they want. I'm not saying it's going to happen next week or you know, or in the near future, but we're on our way now, aren't we? I mean, if we'd gone down, you know, that whole attitude, that hard-nosed businessman might have come out, and then they went, "Oh, do you know what? This is just a waste of time. We've spent all this money and we're back in the Championship." They might have really lost a lot of incentive, but thankfully it didn't happen. And they had such a good summer of recruitment. You know, you compare the recruitment of this summer to the one that we talked about with Riley and Sherwood. It's chalk and cheese, isn't it? I mean, you know, this summer they've bought really well. And as you say, some of the players from last summer are now really starting to prove their worth, like Konza, like Trezeguet, you know, like Target. They're all looking like they're really benefited from having a season in the Premier League. And, you know, when you add Barkley and Watkins and Martinez, you know, and Cash, you know, they've all been terrific signings. You know, injuries play a big part this year. If we can keep the majority of our key players fit, then certainly anything between 6th and 10th is a possibility. Honestly, it is. If we get a few key injuries, then probably we go down a lodge to maybe a ledge to sort of the 12th to 14th category. But I don't think we'll be in relegation trouble this year. I really don't. It'd be very hard to be with the start we've had. I mean, we've already got 15 points on the board, you know. So let's hope we're celebrating a win at 5:00. And you know, up the Villa, mate, because I think that, you know, the outlook is looking rosy.
Howard, thank you very much for your time. We've talked for about an hour and a half now, and I couldn't have wished. It's been one of my favourite interviews to do on this channel. So I really appreciate your time.
So it's been a pleasure, Liam. It's been a real pleasure talking to you too. You're a great guy, and well done for doing this. You know, it's brilliant for Villa fans, and hopefully they'll enjoy this and all the ones to follow.
Well, yes, I hope you guys enjoyed it watching this episode. If you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. But most importantly, stay safe, stay well, and up the Villa.
Up the Villa.
What I keep being too caught up by all my demons, lost without the